Welcome into 49ers Access. My name is Sterling Bennett, and thank you for taking a break from watching the NBA playoffs. Maybe you're having dinner, or maybe you just wanted to say hello. Thank you so much for tuning in today. And we have a very special show because we're talking about arguably, and maybe not even arguably, maybe just certainly, maybe it is the truth, that Malik Mustapha could be my favorite draft pick of the 49ers 2024 draft class as a whole. Again, took 8 players. I think we've finally gotten to my favorite one. So thank you for joining in today. Put your comments in the comments section. I promise to get to them. And we hopefully, maybe fingers crossed, may have some breaking news if all goes well by the end of the show. So you want to stay tuned in regards to Niner coverage in the future. But let's dive into Malik Mustapha because not a polarizing pick, but Malik Mustapha, in a way, similar to Ricky Pearsall. It was like, okay, Niners, they don't need a safety technically. They have Jer Brown, they have Hufanga, but when you dive a little more into that room, could be someone not on the roster next year who we all have come to love in the past or the last couple seasons, that being Talanoa Hufanga. So who is Malik Mustapha? What does he bring to the table? And what will he bring to the San Francisco 49ers? We'll dive into all of that today. Don't forget to leave a like, hit subscribe on YouTube, and let's jump into the San Francisco 49ers first of 3 fourth-round picks, 124 overall. Safety out of Wake Forest, Malik Mustapha. Malik Mustapha, to me, again, my favorite pick. I gave this pick an A+ in regards to my draft grades, the highest one I gave out this year amongst the Niners draft class. I think it was a clear-cut, wow, what a steal pick. And I know the title may hint towards my true thoughts about Malik Mustapha, but I do think he might be their best overall draft pick when it's all said and done. Now, of course, things have to play out, and Malik Mustapha has to earn the title I put on him, which is and really is big expectations. But I do have and do believe there are big things coming in the future for for Malik Mustapha, who I think might replace Talanoa Hufanga, even if it's as close to this year for the San Francisco 49ers. But who is Malik Mustapha? Well, he's a big, brooding safety, 4.5 speed on the 40 time, ran 23 miles an hour. Not on 40 time, not the combine, on the radar gun, on the speed gun. They clocked him at 23 miles an hour. And he's a big-bodied guy, kind of a thumping, strong safety with good coverage skills. And I think just talking about safeties for the Niners, in the last couple of years, they really haven't, had a pure strong safety and a pure free safety. They've kind of played this, both our guys can play both positions, right? Jimmy Ward obviously being one of the more pure free safeties the Niners have had the last few years. But even then, was he a nickelback? Was he a cornerback? Was he a safety? And even to that point, San Francisco played him at so many different places where he wasn't truly a pure roaming, free safety. And going to strong safety, you had Tart, who, he's probably more of a strong safety than a free safety, but could play both if needed to. You got into Hufanga, you had Sean Gibson and others. They really haven't had that pure strong safety and that pure free safety you want roaming on the back end to get interceptions and knock balls down. And while you have the thumping strong safety in the box making plays, they haven't had those two guys. And, they really haven't had those two guys for a long time. Even during the Harbaugh era, they had Deshaun Goldson, who was more of the roaming player, but we saw how Deshaun Goldson hit. He played like a strong safety. Then you had Dante Whitner, who was a pure strong safety that with good coverage skills, mind you. But I think San Francisco is sticking with that mold here of we don't want, you have to play this one position or the way you play is designated for this one spot in the safety room. I think they like to have multiple people, mainly their two starters, be kind of interchangeable, whether it is Ji'Ayir Brown or Talanoa Hufanga and now Malik Mustapha. I know Deshaun Gibson was more of a roaming free safety, but he could play strong safety. He did play in the box at times which again gave San Francisco flexibility, which I think that carries over into the Malik Mustapha pick. That Mustapha, whether he is taking over Hufanga's job or he's that third safety, he's playing in the box when they're playing, single high or whatnot, and they want to go to 3 safety sets, he will give them flexibility to play in the box or play in coverage in the back end, where as of now, as much as I love Hufanga and Ji'Ayir Brown, well, I do think Ji'Ayir Brown has much better coverage skills than Hufanga does. They both are risk takers. They both can be strong safeties in the NFL. And I do think that Hufanga is more of that in the box, light him up playmaker who you want to have on your team, obviously, but there's clear reasons and there's clear examples of him getting beat deep behind him. And you sit back and you're like, dude, we got to get somebody else. I was someone who championed Quentin Lake from Cal. I think it was 2 years ago now in the 2023 NFL draft, or maybe he's 22, either way. Now he's with the Rams as one of their safeties, who I think would be a pure free safety. But Malik Mustapha, I do think, brings something that Hufanga and Ji'Ayir Brown don't bring to the table, despite all of their positive attributes. He's really good in coverage, and you can pair that with being a big-bodied, thumping, strong safety that can play in the box, but also doesn't really have problems playing on the back end, right? Now, he is a safety that he'll get beat on the back end sometimes. They all do. He's a rookie. There's going to be mistakes. He'll probably hit the rookie wall at a certain point, but I do think in regards to his coverage skills, when you dive into the numbers and the tape and the production, it just goes, the Niners haven't had a player like this maybe since Dante Whitner, who was pretty good in coverage downfield and would also light you up. Shout out Pierre Thomas. He'd knock a dude out, right? Now, Mustapha isn't going to knock somebody out, but he can be a really good tackler against the run. But back to his coverage skills, Mustapha at Wake Forest held opposing quarterbacks to a 32% completion rate. That ranked 6th in the entire FBS. We're not talking in his conference, in his division against certain opponents. No, Malik Mustapha had the 6th lowest, I guess you could say, 6th lowest completion rate allowed at 32% in the entire FBS last year. That is phenomenal. He allowed just 1 touchdown in 304 coverage snaps. I mean, this is a guy who he has the anticipation. He will take good angles to the ball. He is a playmaker. He is someone that, yes, will light somebody up, but also he can shut down quarterbacks. Now, I'm not going to call him a shutdown safety right now. Again, he hasn't even taken a snap on the field, but if you want to take his college tape and the production and try to project, which we do with every single rookie, there's a lot of good things and a lot to love, not just like, but love with Malik Mustapha. Shout out to Raphael5629ers, says, what's up, everybody? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got that right. Bobo says, what's up in the comments? Bobo, I see your question. I will dive into it towards the end of the show, so stick around. And Niner Gang, looks like 209, says, what's going on, Sterling? This is one of my favorite picks of the draft, and I agree. This was my A+. This was my draft steal. You got this guy. I can't believe he was still on the board, knowing, and to be fair, a lot of safeties fell. Jaden Hicks fell really far to Kansas City, mind you, but the Packers traded up and then still didn't take Malik Mustapha, and they got a safety. It wasn't like they picked somebody else, an offensive lineman. They went safety, and they chose not to take Mustapha, which is just mind-numbing for Packer fans, and they've told me so. But yes, this is my favorite pick of the draft class over Grendo, over Pearsall, both those guys who I like, over Kingston and Green, who we already talked about so far. But Mustapha, great in coverage, 32% completion rate, 6th in the FBS, 1 touchdown allowed in 304 coverage snaps. He anticipates routes extremely well. He has the high IQ to cover receivers and tight ends deep downfield. He also has good anticipation, but he also is someone that can pair high IQ anticipation with his physical tools. A lot of times coming out of college, you see a lot of players, mainly cornerbacks and safeties, who either have these insane traits, these insane tools, or really high IQ players, excuse me. And there was no better example of that this draft class than a player like Dominic Hampton, who I think went to the Raiders, if I'm correct there. 6-year safety out of Washington, somebody I thought would fit well with San Francisco, but he was a conservative safety, didn't make too many plays, but he was somebody that had a high IQ, took good angles, but just couldn't match the high IQ with the physical traits. I'm going to do it all the whole show. Not Talanoa Hufanga, Malik Mustapha. I'm so sorry. Malik Mustapha can pair those high IQ, the anticipation, with his really good physical traits of being this bigger-bodied, strong safety that can go lay somebody out and make a play. He is somebody that can play deep. Again, 23 miles an hour on the gun, 4.5 40 time. He has the explosiveness, but he also, again, is versatile enough to play in the box, but not even just play in the box. He can also flourish in the box. If there is one knock on him, I'm not going to tell you how great he is and not dive into weaknesses, but there are some times where, while he has a high IQ and he has the traits and he has the explosiveness and he can play in the box, you do want him to improve his tackling consistency. He'll take good angles to players and he'll do that, but it's finishing off plays, right? You can get to a guy, you got to finish the play. That said, he really improved his tackling in his last season at Wake Forest. He really showed miles of improvement in his last season as a tackler at college. So I'm hoping that carries over into the NFL in his rookie season, because if he can match and mirror himself with good tackler and good in coverage, I have a hard time believing that San Francisco can keep him off the field for very long. And we've talked about the past couple guys, ran through the first 3 picks so far of the draft class, that Pooney could play at a certain time. I think he will have a hard time getting on the field unless somebody gets hurt. But because he plays offensive line and he plays guard, in which San Francisco has nobody tied to, I can see an avenue for him to play earlier than most. Pearsall will obviously have an impact, but he's a receiver, granted first round. But at the moment, he is this team's 4th receiver. This team doesn't play the 4th receiver very often, albeit I do think he'll have an impact in certain areas, but it'll be a more mix and match with him rather than outright starting if everyone's healthy for San Francisco and it gives Kyle somebody else. Then Bernardo Green, he also has a path to start, but Green is in a very crowded room, right? Yadam and Rocky Sin, Ambry Thomas, Darrell Luter Jr., Womack. Malik Mustapha, the room is not crowded at all. In fact, the guy who would likely be starting ahead of him may not even be healthy in Talanoa Hufanga. So it's not as if Malik Mustapha doesn't have the clearest path to playing earlier than probably every single draft pick in the entire class of the 8 picks San Francisco had. So I think Malik Mustapha is or the Niners are gonna have a hard time if he comes out and plays well in training camp and OTAs and the preseason. They're gonna have a really hard time keeping him off the field. And I think what he brings to the table is very similar to Hufanga, but he also brings an element to the table where, if all things go perfect, because he has the coverage skills already. Like Hufanga is a playmaker at the line of scrimmage. He can glide up somebody, he can make a play, can go get a pick, go get a fumble, and force someone in the ball to pop out and save the game for you. And I love Hufanga. I'm going to go on a limb and say, despite Hufanga being a former All-Pro, I think 2nd team, maybe 1st team, despite Hufanga being this awesome, there's a real chance that Malik Mustapha is a better player than Talanoa Hufanga. Now, obviously, that can get into a conversation of Hufanga's, future with the team, and we'll get into that in a second. Bobo, I still see you, and I certainly understand Niner fans kind of balking at that, but there were reports all offseason that San Francisco saw the injury and may have said, we don't want to pay a player, or maybe not even don't want to. We just can't pay a player like Hufanga, knowing we have to pay everybody else in that room, and you're probably going to have to say goodbye to somebody. A player coming off an ACL, if they're not playing much, that's an easy person to say goodbye to, unless they come back for cheap, which I'm open to anything. But I do think the Mustapha draft pick, being a 4th-round pick, not a 5th or 6th-round pick, kind of getting lucky he's there, and having very similar play style and traits and better in coverage than Hufanga could lead someone, including myself in this, to believe that Mustapha is the replacement for Hufanga if they choose not to re-sign him. Now, all that said, I haven't even talked about Malik Mustapha's run defense. We talked about great in coverage, he can play deep downfield, and he needs to improve his tackling. Yes, he needs to improve his tackling, but you say that, and in the same breath say in 2023 at Wake Forest, he was phenomenal as a run defender. And I think when you read his stats, you watch his tape, you learn more about him, you just get wowed and kind of astonished he lasts until the 4th round, when there are players that teams overdrafted, teams reach for. Like, my mind goes to Jacksonville, taking Mason Smith from LSU. I think it was at the 2nd or 3rd round. Like, what do you do? I mean, it's Trent Baalke, so that explains it. But what are you doing? Like, you took the 2nd LSU defensive tackle, I think, if not over Mustapha, right after him. And it's like, that guy was going to be a 7th or 6th round pick. What are you doing? Right? But back to Mustapha's run defense, he had a career best 87.5 run defense grade in 2023. That was 5th among Power 5 safeties. He had 21 run stops in 2023. That ranked 15th in the entire FBS among safeties. And when you dive even deeper into the analytics and the percentiles, he was 96th percentile in run defense. He was 95th percentile in run stop. That's incredible for a player like Malik Mustapha, who, again, should not have lasted until the 4th round. I'll go on a limb and just be like, teams are going to smack themselves silly and be like, why did we let San Francisco, of all teams, that already has Nick Bosa and Mooney Ward and Lenore and Warner and hopefully a healthy Greenlaw and insert other stars on the team, why did we let them get Malik Mustapha? What a mistake that was. And if you're San Francisco, you're like, what a relief it is. Man, this guy's still on the board. Phenomenal run defender. He's good in coverage. How did this guy fall this far? I mean, he is the epitome of a draft steal if he can stay healthy. He'll take on big tight ends. He'll take on the offensive linemen, running out in free space, trying to be a lead blocker. He has no fear in saying, I'll take you on, and I'll try to run through you. And I'll open the door for my linebacker partner or my safety behind me with help to make a tackle. And I think for a player that wants to fit in this Niner system, mainly a safety, we saw it. And I'll always go back to it, and so everybody else. That Lions game, that Packers game in the playoffs, a lot of people were not taking on the front blocker, allowing the 3 guys behind them to try to secure tackles. Now, if you do your job, it's up to everyone else behind you to do their job, right? You can only do your job. A lot of guys weren't doing their job. Shout out Bill Belichick, right? You got to do your job. And once you do your job and take on the lead blocker, it leaves a running back or a receiver open to get tackled with nobody else in front of them to block for him. So I think Mustapha brings something that this team did lack, that Hufanga did when he was healthy, taking on lead blockers. Now, Hufanga probably a little more aggressive in the running game than Mustapha is, because Mustapha is someone, while he's had tackling inconsistencies in the past but improved upon them last year, he does know how to diagnose plays really well and can take great angles to the ball carrier. So I do think that this move was kind of twofold for San Francisco of hey, yes, we can get our Hufanga replacement if that's the lane they want to travel down, but if they want to keep Hufanga, now you have 3 really good safeties, and you can play 3 safety sets. You can play 2 high, you can play 1 high, and you can do what you want. You can play dime and nickel, and you can mix and match with how you want to put people out there. And I think, again, I always say this, in a perfect world, which doesn't exist, Hufanga's back to who he was, 2 years ago, and he's completely healthy, and you can, play all 3 of your safeties that are playmakers, right? Now, obviously, I do think that Ji'Ayir Brown and Hufanga are much bigger playmakers than Mustafa is, but sometimes you don't need a playmaker. You just need someone to actually make the play. And I think that's what Mustafa does. And that was kind of like, my thought process in 2 years ago saying, we have Hufanga, let's get a roaming free safety. Sometimes you just need somebody next to the aggressive playmaking style of safety that wants to get picks and will take chances and risks and will miss at times. You need that conservative player. I do think Mustafa is a better coverage player than Hufanga, with a little less playmaking, but a little less risk taking, though, which I think does help San Francisco at times, knowing you have Jair Brown next to you who will take risks, who will be more of that playmaking style of safety next to Mustafa. And again, if all goes right, you put one of them suckers in the box and say, come at us. And you're like, holy crap. Like, we have 3 good run defending, kind of roaming safeties near the box. Now, you might get beat up top. So maybe you have Hufanga play down and Mustafa go back. But it just gives Brandon Staley more flexibility. And I do think that, they didn't go, like, San Francisco attacked the draft in a very smart way, right? They got Pearsall in the first, offense, Green in the second, then went defense, then went offense, then went defense, and then Shanahan said, now it's my turn to play with Guerrero and Cowing. But I do think that lesser than Green, but more like Mustafa, I do think, Brandon Staley likes that kind of star role. He coached Derwin James with the Chargers for a long time, and James was great, just couldn't stay healthy. So I do think we are going to see, whether it is Mustafa, whether it is Ji'Ayir Brown, or, again, fingers crossed he's healthy, Talanoa Hufanga, I do think we are going to see more of an in-box safety kind of role for a designated player this year. And my hope is that they can kind of, bring Hufanga on slowly, and he'll be that star player in the box that can make plays and, light up, Kyler Murray or Marvin Harrison Jr. or insert other player in the flat or coming out of the backfield. Like, my dream would be to have, again, in a perfect world, Hufanga becomes, Troy Polamalu 2.0 and just blows up the line of scrimmage consistently for you. Now, Polamalu is otherworldly, right? But, he had the instincts to play at the line, can blow up plays with his, you jump over the line to get sacks and whatnot, but also was really smart and would save that Steelers defense, big plays against him, because he was that kind of that, in the box, although he can play behind him. Don't get my words twisted here. He was that, can play everywhere kind of safety. And I think Staley wants to use that a little bit now. I only use Polamalu because that's who Hufanga looks like, but also trains with. That said, I do think that Staley wants to bring a little bit of that Chargers defense over to that, reversion back to the Seattle Seahawks style with the 4-3 fronts, or now the 4-2 fronts that most teams run, with Nick Sorensen running the scheme, which I do think screams why Malik Mustapha was a pick. And even if he wasn't, even if Staley wasn't even here, you take Malik Mustapha. That's how good he is. Niner Gang 209 says, Huff is him. You're right. Huff is him. I don't know if we can make like Mustafa is Mim. It doesn't make sense, but like Huff is great. I hope Mustafa comes out and just pushes for that job. I think any Niner fan, despite their love for Talanoa Hufanga, which, this draft has been kind of tough to talk about, not because of the prospects themselves, but because the Niners find themselves in kind of a transitional period of a lot of players could be gone. And, a lot of people don't want their favorite players to go. I've been at training camp and OTAs. I've seen Hufanga there. He's a bolt of energy even to the fan base and the crowd and the sidelines, and you watch him play and you say, this guy just brings it every single day and every single snap. You don't want players like that to go. Now, I don't know if Mustafa's like that, on the field. We'll obviously see once OTAs and training camp start. I think rookie camp starts tomorrow, which I should be there. So that's good stuff. But, we will have to see what Mustafa can bring in regards to energy, but it's hard to, watch a team maybe have to say goodbye to Deebo Samuel and Ayuk and Mustafa. And obviously I have my opinion on who I think will be gone in 1 year's time, but it's hard to tell a fan base, get ready to say goodbye or potentially say goodbye to a player that you love. And I think, this draft class was kind of San Francisco doing that, of like, we don't want to say goodbye to some of these guys, but we might have to. And I think the Mustafa pick, more than, even Green or Pooney or Pearsall so far, like those are like, the Mustafa pick is a clear cut, like Hufanga may be gone. And that sucks. But I think if the price tag is too high, Mike Silver, who has been, although recently with the Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk things, kind of took a step back, is how I'll word that. But we love Mike here. Mike's a great guy and a friend. But Mike earlier in the offseason reported that the Niners maybe, to kind of, in simple words, they could be kind of out on Hufanga. And I think Mustafa is just kind of like, yep, there you go. Like, the report makes sense knowing Mustafa's now here. They're very similar. They bring a lot of similar things to the table, and I do think they had to get better on the back end. I think not so much in the Super Bowl, but seeing how the NFL has kind of shifted the last couple of years, you're seeing a lot of teams, whether it's the Lions, the Packers were one of the bigger examples of this. They got like 5 weapons, and you're like, how do you stop anybody? Whether it's Dontavian Wicks or Jaden Reed or Christian Watson, then a couple tight ends they have. Like, teams are going to be unafraid to space the Niners defense out. And when you do that, one, you not only allow, or I guess in the offense's case, disallow players like Nick Bosa and Hargrave and others to get home, to get to the quarterback. It also means you have to trust your guys on the back end to stop the deep ball. And I think at times San Francisco wasn't great against stopping the deep ball. And not even this year. You go back 2 years ago when Hufanga wasn't all pro. There were still times where you're like, he's great, but this, that, and the other, like he has a hard time guarding the deep ball. And coming off an ACL, he may be horrible at it while he's getting back to who he once was, if he ever becomes what he once was. So the Mustafa pick makes total sense to me. I think San Francisco is gearing up into two facets of like, we have to get more firepower offensively, but we also have to understand that offenses are starting to become more powerhouses, spread things out, push the ball downfield. The Packers, I wouldn't say the Cowboys, but the Packers, the Eagles, the Lions, they want to push and push and push. And if we don't have the ability to stop 5 receivers or three receivers and 2 running backs in the backfield like the Lions like to use, it's going to make our job harder. And I think that's where the Mustafa pick comes into mind, of like, he gives us more on the back end, but also we don't lose much in regards to, in the box style of play, which that's Malik Mustapha. Like, cool. Like, this is a great pick for what San Francisco wants to do. Now I did talk about there being, tackling, words are hard, tackling inconsistencies. But he improved that, and that there really aren't many, knocks on Mustafa's game, especially in last year for him at Wake Forest. But I tend to look at injury history, and Guerrero, who we'll talk about next week, has a lot of injury history, and there's reasons to like that player and love that player. But when you're hurt a lot, it's hard to trust that player. It's hard to want to commit to that player. And that is also what's kind of biting Talanoa Hufanga, where Hufanga is a great player. It's like, wow, he brings so much to the table that other people drafted ahead of him don't bring. He's a spark plug. He's consistent energy. He can do something most other guys can't. But he tore his ACL. And that's why Mustafa's here, partially. But even Malik Mustapha, he tore his ACL in 2021, and he also missed 3 games in 2022. So it's not like his track record is spotless, right? It's not as if, he's never been hurt or has never been bad. Like, he's also been hurt. He tore the exact same ligament in which Hufanga did. Now, that seems to be behind him. He's fully recovered. It hasn't been an issue. But once you get hurt, once you get opened, you might be the same afterwards, but sometimes you might not be. Now, it's the NFL. It's college. They got the best medicine, the best trainers. But you and I both know that these dudes are playing on turf. Thank you, MetLife. It doesn't matter how good your surgeon is. Your knees and your Achilles might go. Now, thankfully, we're in Levi's and whatever, but there's grass at Levi's. But there are maybe some questions of okay, how does that knee hold up? Playing probably the most snaps he'll ever play in his first couple of years in the NFL compared to college, right? At least in one single season. He'll be an instant special teamer that can make an impact, especially with the new kickoff rule. He should be a player that we see making many tackles and performs well in that role. But you're playing more snaps, you're doing different things you weren't used to do. If you're on special teams, when you're compared to playing strong safety, it's different, albeit there are some similarities, but you're cutting more. Change of direction as a safety is can sometimes cause guys like Hufanga just stopped on a dime and then bang, and the ACL is gone. Anything can happen. So it could be something to monitor is all I'm saying. But despite that, or if you even want to use that against Mustafa, I think he's a great player. I think that, well, yes, to Bobo's point, to Bobo, thank you for always being in the chat. Bobo says that, how many guys have we seen look amazing in college but suck in the pros? You're right. That's why you call them draft busts. Now, he ain't Justin Blackman. He's not Jamarcus Russell, but you are right. We've seen our fair share of third-round running backs and middle-round receivers and others along the line that just aren't good. But I'm unafraid to stake my claim to this next comment of I think Malik Mustapha is going to be San Francisco's, biggest or best, however you want to word it, draft steal in the last 2 drafts. I think 4th-round pick for a 2nd-round talent, I believe. And I think at, where they got him, he's better than a lot of safeties that were taken in front of him. Obviously scheme fit matters. I go back to that with Pearsall. A lot of receivers may have been there who you like better, but scheme fit matters for a Kyle Shanahan offense and who he likes over players that were still on the board or you liked ahead of him. There are a lot of players that I valued over Dominic Pooney or Renardo Green, but Shanahan said that doesn't fit what I want to do. Now, is he right? A lot of the times, yes. Has he been wrong? Somebody ring the Joe Williams bell because there have been some whoa, Kyle. Now, all that said, I think San Francisco drafting safeties, their history is pretty good. Jer Brown last year in the 3rd round, Hufanga a couple years ago. They didn't draft Jimmy Ward. They didn't draft Jaquiski Tart. So far, they're hitting 2 for 2 on safeties, and I think they'll hit 3 for 3. And it does seem like it obviously there's plenty of sample size now, but it feels like the bigger whiffs they've had, maybe outside of 2017 with Thomas and Reuben Foster, their bigger whiffs have been on the offensive side of the football, right? Joe Williams, TDP, Trey Sermon, Dante Pettis, Danny Gray, the whiffs have been primarily on the offensive side. We're on defense. We're like, holy crap, Lenore and Ambry Thomas and Hufanga and Jair Brown and Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw and DJ Jones and Ji'Ayir, they seem to be able to find and be more consistent finding stars and starters and impactful players on defense more than offense. Hence what leads me to believe Mustapha, along with the way he plays, how his tape looks, his production at Wake Forest, you put all that together in a big pot and stir it together, and you're like, this guy has got, star potential. And I'll even go further. I think while people like Pearsall and Pooney and Green, They can all have impacts. They can all be, starters for a long time. I would not be shocked if Malik Mustapha is a top 10 safety one day, becomes an all-pro. I would not be shocked if he not only becomes a starter in the near future, but I wouldn't be surprised if we look back in 10 years and are like, Malik Mustapha was the best player in that entire draft class for the Niners. And that's no knock on Pearsall, who I love, or Green, who I like, and Poon, who I think can play a big role. I just love Malik Mustapha. Like, the idea of him being in this defense is just like, yes, please, yes. And so, like, my final takeaway of Malik Mustapha is simply, I think if Hufanga's not healthy, he can be your day one starter. I can argue he's probably already better than Ji'Ayir Brown and has a higher ceiling than Talanoa Hufanga. Like, that's a lot to say, and I get that, and I understand that I can be eating crow in 1 year's time. But, things have to occur. Like, a lot of bad things have to happen for that not to take place, in my opinion. I think he's a great player. I think that San Francisco got themselves one of the biggest steals of the draft, and they got him in round 4. Like, this wasn't a first-round pick. It wasn't a second-round pick. It was a fourth-round pick that could be a day one starter for you. And again, I can argue in 10 years' time, if he plays that long and barring health, that we'll look back and say Malik Mustapha was the best player in the entire draft class for the Niners. I think that, again, it's a lot to say. Like, I'm telling you he's already better than starters on the team. I'm telling you that he could replace Hufanga. I get that. I'm not unaware of, maybe how just dumb and out of this world it sounds of, like, if you're questioning me, I get it. Like, what is that guy talking about? I totally understand. But I do think with what Mustapha brings to the table, his coverage skills, his production, the way he plays, the instincts in which he plays with, and the high IQ in which he has, I think it just translates to the NFL more so than a player like, Ji'Ayir Brown and Hufanga did. And it's no knock on those guys. I like those guys. I think Ji'Ayir Brown came along towards the end of the year and he had a pick against Mahomes in the Super Bowl. Like, Ji'Ayir Brown's awesome, but he's still a second-year player. And the coverage skills aren't perfect. Mustapha has shown to be a better coverage player than Ji'Ayir Brown coming out of Penn State and was picked a whole round later than him, right? And Hufanga, who, again, we've gushed about the last 2 years and even on this own podcast, like, Mustapha has shown more in coverage than Hufanga did coming out of USC. So don't get it twisted. I'm not saying that I don't like those guys. I love those guys. I hope we get to see all three of them play together. It's going to be awesome if it's true and if it actually happens. I just think that San Francisco, like, Malik Mustapha, like, it's just like you watch him and, like, you can tell when guys are just like, that's a good football player. Like, take this as an example. There are guys that just have traits. They're super big athletes. They're just massive humans. And you go, like, you remember Sean Oakman? I think that was his name, from like Oregon or Baylor. He was massive. He's covered in tats. He was like 6'7". And you're like, holy crap. I never want to see that guy in a dark alley anywhere. Like, he's just physical specimen. And you're like, wow. But then he sucks at football. You're like, what? But then you watch other players who don't really have the traits, and you're like, well, the guy's just a good player. Mustapha has the traits and is just a really good player together. And obviously, things have to be go into action, and he has to go out there and perform well and prove his worth. But as a fourth-round player, there's no expectations on him. Like, Ricky Pearsall has you better be Debo, you better be Ayuk, you better be Juwan Jennings and more already on him, right? Renardo Green already has you're the highest cornerback this regime has ever taken. You better be Mooney Ward 2.0. You better be a starter in the instant future. Dominic Pooney already has the expectation of you better supplant Banks or Feliciano or McKivitz this year. And Mustafa's like, I'm just going to play football and be awesome. And that is because there are starters in place ahead of him, but it's not like there already isn't, an avenue for him to take a job. And I think that, it also gives San Francisco time. Like, let's say Mustafa isn't wowing anybody. He's just fine, right? If Hufanga isn't healthy enough to play it, it also gives San Francisco time to allow him to get back to 100%. And I won't say not lose much, because a 3 or 4 year Hufanga is probably better than Mustafa out of college, right? But at least gives them time to get their former All-Pro back. In the case they want to go on a long playoff run again, which they obviously do, but also if they want to see what that room looks like with those 3 players in it, and they want to evaluate Hufanga's health going into next offseason, knowing he's not under contract. So there's a lot to like, a lot of avenues to take. And I think Malik Mustapha, I will put my stamp, my claim on it, is a certified draft steal for San Francisco. And I do believe that, again, in 10 years' time, in my crystal ball, if you will, we could see Malik Mustapha being the best player of this draft class. I just think he brings so much to the table. And it's hard to say goodbye to Hufanga if that happens, but there is a world where, while losing Hufanga hurts and it stinks and it's a future conversation, not a now one for sure, there is a world where Malik Mustapha kind of makes us forget about Hufanga if everything goes well. Now, that said, life happens. Sometimes guys get hurt. Sometimes guys play bad. And Bobo, to your point, what is to say that his game translates to the NFL perfectly? Who's to say that there aren't a lot of bumps in the road? Like, we've seen Eric Armstead, who I think we all like, but he sucked the first 4 years of his career. He just wasn't good. Now, the teams weren't good, but he just wasn't good. And he was a late bloomer, then turned that into a phenomenal career afterwards. But it's not like Mustapha has the "you better be good day one" expectations. He has the "wow, this kid could be a steal and be good one day." He doesn't have to come in and be a star. But I do think of the draft class as a whole, there's a real conversation to be had that his ceiling is probably the highest of anybody. Now, that doesn't mean that Pearsall can't be great or Green can't be great. It just means Mustapha can be really, really, really good. Hence why I gave this pick. Yes, because it was in the 4th round. Yes, because I love Mustapha. And give it an A+. This was my only A+ grade of the draft grades I handed out this year for San Francisco. And again, I can scream to high heavens as to why I think so, and I've kind of already explained that to you. But I just think when you look at the totality of the draft class, you're not going to give, or rarely going to give, 7th round picks A+ when they're not Brock Purdy, right? But I just think that, I gave Pearsall a B+. I gave Green a C+. I gave Pooney a B. I gave Malik Mustapha an A+. And it wasn't even like what should I give this player? I had to sit down and think about what I wanted to give Pearsall and Green and Pooney. And Mustapha was like easy A+ off the board. And it was just like, yep, that makes sense. And in fact, he was not just my only A+ grade. He was my only A grade of the entire draft class, which tells you how much I like Malik Mustapha. I don't really have much for you other than just this. If you aren't sold, and I so get it, why listen to little old me? Like, share, and subscribe, by the way. But if you aren't sold, everybody, including myself, but everybody, the consensus pro comp is a player you're going to love. Now, what are pro comps? What are they worth? Again, guys have to prove it, but the consensus pro comp is a player that the Niners and their fans have been kind of egging the Niners to sign, and they've been trying to kind of lure over to the Bay Area the past 2 years, whether it be via trade or via scheme fit or just fans saying, I want to see this guy play in the red and gold, Malik Mustapha's pro comp is Kyle Duggar of the Patriots. And I think everyone loves Kyle Duggar and would have been like, this is awesome if he would have signed here. So you get him in the 4th round on a cheaper contract for 4 years for practically nothing compared to having to pay Duggar big money. Like, I don't know if Malik Mustapha takes San Francisco out of the safety market. You can definitely have that conversation of, well, Justin Simmons is out there and Quandre Diggs is still out there, and there could be a body you want to sign. Deshaun Gibson is still out there. You want to bring him back in, which I wouldn't be against. I think, why be 2 safeties strong when you can be 3 or 4? I'm all for that. Guys get hurt. Things happen. Right now, I do think Mustapha does take San Francisco out of the Justin Simmons market. I also think he takes him out of the Quandre Diggs market. But I don't think Malik Mustapha takes the Niners out of the Tashawn Gibson market. I think there's a real possibility that come training camp, past OTAs, past the, take a couple weeks off period of summer, that we walk into training camp with Ji'Ayir Brown, Hufanga trying to get healthy again and rehabbing, Malik Mustapha, and Tashawn Gibson back in that room. I think, it's really hard once you get a taste of a Super Bowl and you lose. It's really hard to not say, honey, my child, give daddy one more year. I just need one more shot at it. And it's hard to leave that on the table, knowing Gibson played, again, pretty well last year for San Francisco. So I do think there is a chance you walk into 2024 with a safety room of Gibson, Mustapha, Brown, and Hufanga, with players like Taylor Hawkins off an ACL injury, hopefully rehabbing middle of the year, and others they're going to put in that room and whatnot. George Odom is still there too. I always forget George Odom, but George Odom is still there. But I do think that, San Francisco at this moment, if Hufanga is healthy, they have a really good safety room. And I think, they always had 2. And when they drafted Hufanga, it was like, okay, let's see what the kid's got. And obviously he recovers the punt against Green Bay and they score and they win in the playoffs in the snow, and it was awesome. But, they really haven't had 3 good safeties. And I do think that if Hufanga can get healthy, you might see some 3 safety action, and that's really exciting, knowing that it's not just, a generic free safety and a generic strong safety. You have two playmakers in the back end, or if Hufanga's in the box, you have 2 playmaking, safeties in Hufanga and Ji'Ayir Brown. And you got Mustapha in the back roaming around playing the high end. Like, this is playing in center field for you. That's a great. That is what we have not seen that in a long time. Probably the last 15 years with the Niners, and that's a really good thing to have for a team to have that much flexibility on defense. And Bobo asks a really good question. And yes, the answer is yes. Does this mean the rumored Jamal Adams signing is BS? I would say so. Jamal Adams' name is such a polarizing one because he sucks. Well, I'll rephrase that. He's not very good, especially in coverage. And I do think it would just negate, like, why would you draft Mustapha, a good coverage player, and then sign Jamal Adams? Now, if there's a world in which Adams wants to play linebacker, maybe, but like, Adams has always hurt. I mean, you watched him last year against the Giants. He got concussed. They told him, you can't go back in the game. He's out there throwing stuff, and I get it, he wants to play, but like, when's the last time you saw a Niner player do any of that? They can get angry, sure. They can get frustrated. When's the last time you saw a Niner player throwing things on the sideline because the medical staff says, hey, you can't go in? Like, they never take it to the field. Now, we've seen Trent Williams smack a player in the face a couple times on the field, but we've never seen a player on the sideline being told, you can't go back in, and then take it on to the field. I just don't think, Adam fits in San Francisco. I think he's a little fragile. He's around 30. If he isn't above 30 now, he's pretty old at this point. And once you get hurt and you play the way he does, which early on in his career was really physical, like they used him at the line of scrimmage because he was basically a glorified edge rusher, and he was a dog with the Jets. And maybe 1 year for Seattle, but injuries pile up. You get exposed against better offenses. Like, let's not forget, he played with the Jets when they were bad, but also played in the division when the Dolphins weren't good. And it was the back end of the Patriots regime. And then the Bills were kind of just building up things. So he hasn't, like, him being great was against, like, pretty bad opponents. Then he gets to the NFC West, and it's like Shanahan and McVay are just dicing you up left and right. So I would say no. Like, honestly, what value would he bring you don't already have? You have your third linebacker in Devondre Campbell. You just drafted Bethune. You have Winters and Graham and DFF waiting there, to go in case one of those guys goes down. You obviously had Fred Warner still. And now you have 4 safeties already, and you might sign a 5th one if Gibson wants to come back. So, like, no, there's no room for you. I'd rather take a chance on Cody Schrader and Evan Anderson and, whoever else the UDFAs are this year, who we already covered earlier. Check that video out. But no, I don't think the Adams thing makes any sense. And Tony Meredith coming in hot with Mustafa is Whitner 2.0. And if you were here earlier, I'm not sure if you were. If you were here earlier, I kind of hinted towards that being the case. More so used it about Hufanga and how they play similar, but Niners haven't had a really good coverage strong safety that can layeth the smack down on your candy asses like Dante Whitner. Malik Mustapha could be one of those players. And I think that's the perfect way to end the show right there. 1, it's a rock reference, and 2, me saying candy asses on the stream. Isn't that fun? I hope you had a wonderful week. It's Thursday. Tomorrow, sound the alarms. Niners rookie camp day 1 is tomorrow, I think 11 a.m. Nick Sorensen talks to the media. New defensive coordinator, might be 11:30. But at 1 p.m., we get our first look at a Niners practice since the Super Bowl. Football's back, baby. It's slow and it's trudging along, but it's back. And if all goes to plan, tomorrow I'll be there. So hopefully you can follow us on social media at 49ers_access is the Twitter or X. 49ers.access is the Instagram. Follow me on there, and hopefully I can bring you some Niner content we're all thirsting for, waiting for the drip of the sponge into our mouths of say, finally, football's back, baby, and quench our thirst for some real NFL action since a horrible, horrible end to last season. All that to say, thank you guys for watching and listening. Tony, Bobo, Niner Game, Spy Nick Danger says, go Niners, hit the like button. Thank you guys so much. Raphael at the top, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you like, share, subscribe, leave that review, and use our promo code 49ersaccess at SeatGeek.com to save yourself $20 off. It's Mother's Day this weekend. Take your mom to a ball game. Use that promo code, save yourself $20. Maybe buy her a beer, buy her a drink, buy her some flowers, or be cheap and save yourself some money as well. But use the promo code and celebrate Mother's Day in relatively cheaper style than you would if you didn't use the promo code. But again, my name is Sterling Bennett. Thanking you for watching and listening. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Have a wonderful Mother's Day. And until next time, stay faithful.